I never imagined that the hands I once held with love, the same hands I taught to write, tie shoes, and pray at night, would one day be the ones reaching for my downfall. Betrayal does not always come with raised voices or slammed doors. Sometimes it walks quietly through the front door wearing familiarity. The deepest wounds are not carved into the skin, but into trust. And when trust shatters, it does not break cleanly. It splinters, lodges, and echoes. And when the person you fear most is someone you once would have died to protect, everything changes. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're tuning in from. We love seeing how our stories connect people from all around the world. Your comments and thoughts bring this community to life, and we're so grateful to have you on this journey with us. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a cozy seat, maybe a cup of coffee or tea, and prepare yourself for a tale that will captivate your heart from beginning to end. Let's begin. My name is Margaret Walsh, and at 62 years old, I have become intimately familiar with the quiet rhythm of a life that feels both peaceful and unfinished. I live in a small, aging two-story house tucked along a tree-lined street in Portland, Oregon, not far from Forest Park, where the scent of evergreens seems to hang in the air no matter the season. On most mornings, the sky is gray and gentle rain rolls down the windows like slow-moving tears. But I have always found a strange comfort in the weather here. It has a way of wrapping around you without asking questions. My days begin early, not because I am busy, but because my body no longer understands the luxury of sleep. I sit on my small balcony with chamomile tea, wrapped in a knitted shawl, listening to the soft hum of a waking neighborhood. My hands curl around the warm mug, easing the stiffness that has become part of my daily life since arthritis crept into my joints. I used to move freely, guiding children through art projects filled with finger paint and glitter. But those days are now memories that feel both near and impossibly far. After 30 years as an elementary school art teacher, retirement should feel like a reward, yet it has revealed the stillness I never prepared myself to face. I fill the hours tending to indoor plants that thrive better than I do, flipping through well-worn sketchbooks and volunteering at a small community art room once a week. The children there remind me of who I once was, someone whose identity was shaped by joy rather than caution. I try to keep my independence intact, even when my knees argue with every flight of stairs and I find myself gripping the rail a little harder than yesterday. My husband, Thomas, would have told me I am stronger than I give myself credit for. He was a firefighter, the kind of man who carried courage the way others carried wallets. He died from a sudden stroke 7 years ago, leaving behind his flannel shirt that still hangs in my closet and the wooden rocking chair he built by hand. I sometimes sit in it at night, closing my eyes, imagining the unfinished plans we once whispered about, the ones involving travel, photographs, and growing old together with soft laughter instead of quiet rooms. The house we bought together is fully paid for, and that should feel like a blessing. Instead, it feels oversized and demanding, with rooms that echo more than they shelter. The utilities drain more than they should, repairs come faster than solutions, and there are entire corners I do not touch because they remind me of endings I have spent nearly a year thinking about selling it, not out of financial desperation, but because I fear becoming a prisoner inside a place built for a life that no longer exists. I have one son, Daniel Walsh, who lives in Boise, Idaho. He is 36 now, absorbed in a life that seems too fast for phone calls that last longer than a few minutes. He used to be gentle, thoughtful, and curious, but adulthood has a way of reshaping people the way rivers reshape stones. I miss him, though I rarely admit it out loud. Sometimes I wonder if I changed, or if he did, or if it is simply fate that closeness melts as distance grows. Lately, something inside me feels unsettled, as though life is quietly shifting beneath the floorboards. I cannot name it yet, but I feel the air holding a secret, waiting. If you're still watching and curious about how quickly a peaceful life can shift, comment number 1 below so I know you're with me. Things are about to change in ways no one expects. A few quiet days passed without anything notable, and I slipped back into the small routines that shaped my mornings and evenings. I watered my plants with slow and deliberate movements, kept a kettle warming on the stove, and carried a soft awareness that life, although calm, was beginning to feel like it was tilting ever so slightly towards some invisible edge. It was on a late Wednesday morning, while the rain tapped a patient rhythm against my kitchen window, that my phone rang with a tone that immediately felt out of place. Daniel rarely called outside his usual schedule, and never during daytime hours when he claimed to be drowning in work or handling responsibilities that did not require conversation. For a moment, I stared at the phone without answering, unsure why my heartbeat quickened. When I finally pressed the button and placed it against my ear, his tone startled me more than the call itself. His voice sounded unusually energetic, polished, almost rehearsed, like someone preparing for a pitch rather than a personal conversation. There was something missing beneath the brightness, something that used to sound familiar and warm. I told myself not to overthink it. Children grow up, voices change, and priorities evolve, but a soft knot formed inside my chest and refused to loosen. He asked several questions that felt casual on the surface, yet oddly pointed beneath each sentence. He wondered how I had been sleeping, whether my knees were giving me much trouble, whether the house felt manageable, and whether I ever considered the benefits of simplifying life before it became a forced decision. I answered slowly, careful with my words, sensing there was a meaning tucked inside each inquiry. Then, like a stone dropped into still water, he shifted the conversation toward real estate. He mentioned that Portland property values were increasing in a way that could be described as once in a generation, and that selling before market cooling could be financially life-changing. The phrase seemed too polished, too professional, and did not sound like natural language from my son who once disliked even the idea of spreadsheets. I felt a quiet, cold breeze of disbelief move through me. I had not mentioned anything to him about possibly selling. Not even during moments of vulnerability, I asked how he learned about housing trends, and he told me his wife, Jenna, had been studying generational wealth strategies after watching financial workshops online. My heart sank without making a sound. He spoke about shared family decisions, long-term planning, and maintaining assets under the same umbrella, but those words did not belong to the son who once brought home stray animals and defended the shy children in school. I could not understand the transformation, or maybe I could and simply did not wish to face it. After we exchanged polite farewells, I held the silent phone in my hands, realizing the weight it carried could not be measured. The kitchen felt suddenly unfamiliar, as though I was standing inside a room that belonged to someone else. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed louder, and each second echoed with a hint of warning. When I walked into the hallway, I heard a faint creak from upstairs, reminding me that empty rooms can hold memories, but they can also hold fears that do not yet have names. I stood there, motionless, understanding only one thing with complete clarity. That call was not just a conversation, it was a doorway, and something had already stepped through it. If you sense something darker behind that innocent phone call, comment number 2 below, because what comes next will confirm your instincts. Several quiet weeks slipped by after that unsettling phone call, and I tried to bury my uneasiness beneath steady actions. Rather than spiraling thoughts, I scheduled meetings with a trusted real estate agent, an attorney, reviewed documents slowly in the quiet of my living room, and reminded myself that I had the right to reshape my life without asking anyone to approve it. The process was long, packed with decisions that made my head spin, yet I felt strangely empowered each time I signed my name. By early spring, the sale of my house was finalized. I handed over the keys that once represented marriage, motherhood, holidays, and the version of myself I used to know. In exchange, a large sum of money was wired directly into my personal bank account, and the confirmation email blinked on my screen like a surreal announcement that life had officially changed direction. Leaving the attorney's office, I sat alone inside my parked car and stared at my hands resting on the steering wheel. They trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the incredible weight of the moment I had spent most of my life budgeting carefully, comparing prices at grocery stores, delaying personal medical appointments to afford Daniel's school supplies, and never holding more than a modest savings account. Now, 450,000 United States dollars carried my name, my future, and my responsibility. I told myself that the money was not a prize or a trophy. It was freedom. The freedom to live without fear of becoming a burden. The freedom to choose where I wanted to spend the rest of my life. And the freedom to age with dignity instead of desperation. That thought warmed me more than any heating vent inside that car. For 2 days, I tried to savor the sense of stability. I researched 55-plus living communities, looked at sunny locations, and felt excitement blooming slowly like a cautious flower. Then another unexpected call arrived, once again from Daniel. His voice sounded cheerful and enthusiastic, a tone he rarely used with me anymore. He said he wanted to drive over and celebrate my achievement, and he mentioned that Jenna insisted on coming too, because she believed important milestones should never be honored alone. I agreed, although the timing felt suspicious. I tried to silence those thoughts, because mothers, especially aging ones, often choose love over doubt, even when doubt whispers louder. They arrived late in the afternoon carrying red wine, a bouquet of supermarket flowers, and smiles that seemed slightly forced around the edges. We shared a meal I prepared earlier that morning, and I worked hard to pretend that everything felt natural. The compliments flowed generously. The laughter sounded slightly exaggerated, and the atmosphere resembled a performance filled with scripted lines. After dessert, the tone shifted like a curtain being pulled open too quickly. Daniel leaned forward with a serious expression and began describing the financial struggles of his business, explaining that his restaurant and bar were behind on rent, drowning in debt, and facing the threat of permanent closure. His words were heavy with fear and urgency. Jenna added details about market opportunities and future success if they could inject 100,000 United States dollars immediately. Their eyes glimmered with determination, ambition, and something else I could not identify, something that chilled me rather than moved me. A deep sorrow pooled inside my chest. Daniel's crisis mattered, but I could not ignore the truth that my future depended on careful decisions, not emotional rescue missions I gently declined, explaining that my money existed for long-term security, medical care, and stable housing. The air grew tense. Jenna's expression hardened, and disappointment spread across Daniel's face like a silent accusation. They left with a polite goodbye that lacked warmth, and when the door closed behind them, the house felt colder than ever. Something invisible had cracked, and I sensed it would not repair itself quietly. If you're starting to feel the tension rising and wonder whether love can turn into leverage, comment number 3, the mask has only begun to slip. Almost a full week passed after Daniel and Jenna walked out of my house with disappointed expressions. During that week, I tried to anchor myself in small reassuring routines, as though daily habits could patch emotional cracks. I baked bread for the first time in months, rearranged the living room to reduce clutter, and spent long afternoons reading near the window where natural light softened the strain in my eyes. Yet there was a quiet pulse of unease beneath everything I did. I knew with unsettling certainty that the conversation about money had not ended. It had simply paused, like an actor waiting for a cue behind a curtain. On a calm Sunday morning, Without warning, Daniel and Jenna appeared at my door again. They smiled brightly, carrying 2 bags of groceries filled with fresh produce, pastry boxes, and items I had never asked for. Their tone was noticeably gentle, almost sugary, and they complimented the smell of my home, the warmth of the lighting, and the coziness of my decor. They offered to help reorganize closets, clean shelves, and even mend loose cabinet handles. It felt like kindness wearing a costume, believable from a distance, suspicious upon close inspection. Still, I reminded myself that mothers often want to believe the best, even when the best feels rehearsed. Their conversation focused heavily on concerns for my well-being. They repeatedly pointed out the physical risks of living alone, the stress of managing property sales, and the emotional weight of handling finances without support. They framed every sentence as though I was fragile, and they were wise guardians stepping in to protect me. The sudden shift from frustration to overprotection made me feel as if I were the subject of a carefully constructed intervention. My instinct whispered that something about this was not natural. Later that afternoon, Jenna casually mentioned that she had arranged for a financial professional to stop by for a brief consultation. Her voice carried a confident tone that implied the decision was already beneficial and should not be questioned. Shortly after, a man named Trent arrived, dressed in a tailored suit with polished shoes and a smile that felt sharpened rather than warm. He introduced himself as someone who specialized in retirement asset optimization, and he spoke with a rhythm that reminded me of commercial advertisements rather than genuine guidance. He presented hypothetical risks, market fluctuations, and potential threats to personal wealth if not handled strategically. He spoke quickly, used vocabulary layered with financial buzzwords, and gestured toward a tablet where theoretical growth charts appeared in glossy colors. His solution was surprisingly simple and unnerving. I should open a joint investment account with Daniel and sign a legal document granting full authority to manage my funds, since online systems and modern financial platforms could be overwhelming for someone my age. He said it with a charming tone, but I felt the ground beneath my confidence shift. Throughout the conversation, I noticed that he looked at Daniel and Jenna, whenever explaining major decisions, as though I were a valuable asset rather than the owner of my own life. He did not offer printed documents for review, only digital summaries, and he encouraged immediate action, describing hesitation as the greatest financial mistake. My heartbeat tightened because something beneath his professionalism felt hollow. I thanked them calmly, even though anxiety pressed against my ribs. I excused myself by saying I needed time, prayer, and rest to ensure wise choices. That night, I contacted an elder law attorney whose number I found through a senior support group. He listened patiently, asked detailed questions, and then advised immediate caution. He explained that rushed authorization, joint accounts, and persuasive third parties were common signs of elder exploitation. He instructed me to update all digital passwords and avoid signing anything without independent review. When the call ended, I sat alone in my quiet living room. I stared at my hands, remembering when they once held Daniel's small fingers as he learned how to cross a street safely. Now, it felt as though those same hands were expected to place my future into his. I realized this was not simply about money, but about control, and the conflict that had once whispered was now beginning to speak clearly. If you noticed the moment kindness became a calculation and felt the chill behind the smiles, comment number 4, the consequences are closer than anyone realizes. The weeks that followed felt like a slow unraveling of the life I once knew. After many late-night conversations with myself and careful research, guided by the elder law attorney, I made the decision to leave Portland and begin again somewhere far away from familiar shadows. Florida offered the promise of warm mornings, softer winters, and a community designed for people who no longer wished to fight against the demands of a large home. By the end of the month, I had signed a lease on a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a peaceful senior living community in Sarasota. The building smelled faintly of citrus and fresh paint, and every hallway light carried a gentle glow that reminded me of safety rather than supervision. The courtyard outside was filled with palm trees that whispered in the breeze as though carrying secrets between their leaves. The sidewalks were smooth, wheel-friendly, and lined with benches shaped like seashells. Staff members walked the grounds with quiet attentiveness, ready to offer help without hovering. I was given a personal emergency alert necklace during my welcome orientation, something I had never imagined needing, yet I placed it around my neck with gratitude rather than embarrassment. For the first time in many months, my nights were not haunted by the fear of icy stairs or sudden isolation. Still, even the warmest air could not dissolve unfinished business. I used 150,000 United States dollars from the sale of my house to purchase furnishings, secure medical insurance plans, and cover initial fees for residency. The remaining balance rested in my personal bank account. I planned to transfer it into a trust. Once I reviewed all legal structures with my attorney, I believed I was finally beyond reach. But distance does not erase intentions. It only delays impact. When Daniel called to say that he and Jenna wanted to visit and see my new home, I felt a pang of hope and dread at the same time I told myself to stay calm and clear-minded, even if my heart beat with familiar longing. They arrived on a bright afternoon, wearing casual vacation clothing and sunglasses perched on their heads. At first, they admired the serene surroundings, touched the smooth countertops, and complimented the soft pastel colors of my living room. Their voices sounded almost cheerful, yet there was a flicker in their eyes like hunters circling a target they believed was still within reach. Once we sat down in the dining area, the tone shifted with the subtlety of a tightening rope. Daniel began describing the worsening condition of his business, painting a vivid picture of unpaid debts, threatening landlords, and looming legal consequences. His words were heavy with urgency, and moments later, Jenna leaned in with even sharper intensity, outlining how a $200,000 contribution would secure his future and save everything he had worked for. The air turned dense, and my chest tightened. I explained slowly, with all the care a mother could summon, that I could not risk my financial life to rescue theirs. I spoke about long-term security, medical needs, and the reality of aging. The emotional temperature in the room changed instantly. Jenna's expression twisted from pleading to anger, and her voice rose, as if wounded pride demanded retaliation. Before I had time to stand, she reached across the table, snatched my checkbook with swift aggression, and then grabbed my debit card from the side counter. I moved to take it back, driven by instinct rather than strength, but she reacted with a force I never imagined she was capable of. Her hand clamped around my wrist and twisted sharply, sending a piercing bolt of pain shooting up my arm. A sickening crack echoed inside my head, and I gasped as my knees weakened. Daniel stood frozen, eyes wide, neither defending nor assaulting, suspended in a place where silence felt like permission. My breath trembled, and tears blurred my vision. In that moment, love was no longer a bond. It was a weapon. Trembling, I reached for the emergency alert necklace resting against my chest and pressed the button without hesitation. That single motion marked the end of denial and the beginning of truth. The moment everything shifted felt strangely slow, as if time stretched into a long, elastic thread that refused to snap. My wrist throbbed with a deep pulsing pain that seemed to radiate into every part of my body. I could hear my own breathing, uneven and panicked, echoing inside my ears. The kitchen light above me flickered slightly, and even that small detail felt surreal, as if the world was slowly fading away from my control. My son stood frozen a few steps away, pale and trembling, and his wife hovered near the counter with wide, frantic eyes and clenched fists. The room that had felt like my personal sanctuary only days earlier had turned into a battlefield. I never imagined myself standing in. The pain created a fog around my thoughts, yet I could still catch fragments of their voices. They were whispering aggressively, trying to decide what story would sound believable, what version of events could protect them from consequences. The word accident floated in the air like a forced lifeline. The more they repeated it, the more obvious it became that they were preparing a narrative rather than acknowledging the truth. I felt a wave of heartbreak heavier than the physical injury. I never expected safety from the world, but I had always believed safety existed inside my home and inside my family bond. That illusion was gone. I sat against the wall, trying not to move, terrified that one more inch would send electric shocks up my arm. In the distance, I heard heavy boots running through hallway floors, the sound of radios, and hurried voices. When my door burst open and uniformed responders entered, I felt both relief and dread. They approached me with calm professionalism, examining my arm with practiced gestures, asking questions with slow, careful tone. The lights from their equipment reflected on the tiled floor like harsh truth cutting into every lie that had been forming in the room. My son tried to speak first, but his voice broke. His wife stepped in, trying to explain that I slipped, that I was clumsy, that injuries happened all the time when elderly people lived alone. Her attempts sounded rehearsed rather than emotional. The responders listened politely, but looked directly at me, not her. They asked me if I wanted to speak privately. In that second, I felt the weight of 62 years of motherhood pressing on my chest. I remembered scraped knees I treated, nightmares I chased away, sandwiches packed early mornings before school, and graduation tears that fell from pride. I remembered how small his hands once were. I remembered the silent promise I made while holding newborn skin against my chest that I would protect him forever. But I also remembered the look in his eyes when money became more important than my well-being. The transformation was not sudden, but gradual, like water eroding a stone, until the shape no longer resembled what it was. I wondered if my silence would keep him safe or teach him that hurting others brought no consequences. The responders asked again if I felt safe. My throat tightened and my chest burned as I realized that telling the truth might not destroy him, but perhaps save both of us from further darkness. My voice came out weak and cracked, but I forced it through. I told them what had happened, without drama, without exaggeration, only facts shaped by pain and betrayal. I saw my son close his eyes, as if a door had slammed inside his mind. The responders documented every detail and prepared a stretcher to transport me. As they lifted me gently, I felt a strange combination of fear and relief. This moment marked the point where love no longer meant silence, and survival no longer meant endurance. The line had been crossed, and that nothing would ever return to what it once was. If your heart dropped the moment loyalty collided with survival, comment number 6. Now let's move forward into chapter 7, where the price of truth begins to unfold. I woke up to a dim hospital room with only the distant hum of machines reminding me that I was still alive. The ceiling lights were muted, reflecting softly against pale walls that smelled of antiseptic. My wrist was secured in a large cast wrapped tightly from fingertips to elbow, elevated on pillows to control swelling. The throbbing ache pulsed with every slow beat of my heart, spreading into my elbow and shoulder like a dull and relentless signal that nothing would be the same again. For a moment, I closed my eyes and imagined I was still inside the warm familiarity of my cottage, preparing a cup of chamomile tea, unaware that my life was about to fracture in more ways than one. That fantasy vanished as soon as the pain reminded me of reality. A nurse entered with quiet footsteps, checked the monitors, and asked simple questions about my discomfort, appetite, and dizziness. I nodded through most of them because speaking felt heavy and exhausting. When she explained that the orthopedic surgeon believed my recovery would be lengthy due to age and bone fragility, I stared at her, unable to decide whether to feel grateful for honesty or terrified by what it meant. She mentioned physical therapy, follow-up assessments, and possible complications that could appear months later. Her professional tone did not soften the blow that echoed inside my chest. I was 62 years old, living alone, and would soon face weeks or even months of limited mobility. I had always prided myself on being capable and self-sufficient, but now even buttoning a blouse or carrying a kettle of water seemed like a distant privilege. Later that afternoon, 2 officers returned to complete their report. They spoke kindly but firmly, documenting every detail, including my emotional state, the surroundings of the incident, and my previous attempts to set boundaries with my son and daughter-in-law. They explained that the case would be handled as elder abuse and coercion with intent to access personal assets. The words felt heavy, cold, and humiliating, not because they were wrong, but because they reflected a truth I never wanted to be associated with. It was painful to acknowledge that the people who should have protected me instead became my greatest threat. When my attorney, Mr. Warren, entered the room, I felt a slight sense of stability returning. He reviewed initial legal procedures, reassured me that my financial accounts would remain protected, and informed me that the authorities had decided to temporarily detain Joshua for investigation while keeping Amber under supervision due to involvement in planning. Hearing my son's name linked to legal custody carved a hollow ache deeper than any physical fracture. I wished I could deny everything, erase it, or turn back time to a moment where help meant comfort instead of threats. Yet I also knew silence could have allowed the situation to escalate even further. I had reached my threshold, not because I stopped loving my son, but because loving him without protecting myself would have turned me into an accomplice of my own destruction. When Martha finally walked into my room, her presence filled the silence like a warm blanket. She adjusted my pillow, brushed my hair away from my face, and placed a gentle hand over my uninjured arm. She did not offer empty sympathy. She reminded me that survival was not shameful, that betrayal did not erase motherhood, and that healing required choosing myself even if it broke my heart. A social worker arrived near evening, explaining that I qualified for counseling sessions and peer support groups for senior victims of familial exploitation. As the sun dipped outside the window, painting soft lines of amber and blue across the sky, I realized that although I felt broken and abandoned, I was not actually alone. Help existed, and I needed to reach for it. The following morning, when the medication settled and the fog inside my head lessened, I finally felt able to think clearly. The pain was still present like a constant background hum, but something inside me had shifted. I no longer replayed the moment my wrist snapped or questioned how my own son could hurt me. Instead, I started asking myself what I needed to do next, not to simply survive, but to rebuild. The hospital ceiling no longer looked like a symbol of helplessness. It looked like a blank slate. I understood that no one was coming to rescue me except myself. And if I did not take responsibility for my well-being, I would forever live in fear of repeating the same devastation. Later that afternoon, my attorney returned with folders filled with plans, documents, and strategies instead of reassurances. We spoke in a quiet corner of the room, and he walked me through the reality that financial assets required protection beyond passwords and verbal boundaries. He explained how elderly individuals could become targets even within their own homes, even by their own families, and that legal systems existed not only to punish, but to shield. He laid out suggestions: building a trust account managed by a neutral financial institution, arranging a permanent restraining order if necessary, and transferring ownership of my remaining funds to secure channels that would require a third-party oversight. Each decision sounded intimidating at first, but the more he spoke, the more I realized these were not walls. They were locks, boundaries, and armor pieces that I should have owned long before anyone tried to steal from me. The social worker visited shortly after the attorney left, and her calm presence brought a different type of guidance. She discussed emotional recovery, safety networks, and prevention. Rather than legal terms, she suggested peer support groups where individuals like me shared experiences without judgment and where silence was encouraged only when someone needed a moment to breathe. She advised changing my phone number, reducing social media presence, and staying in temporary housing if needed once discharged. She reminded me that healing required both physical recovery and emotional restructuring, and that neither one should be rushed. Her tone was gentle, but her message was firm. I had choices. That night, I stared out the hospital window at the small glow of streetlights beneath the dark sky. I thought about the house where I used to live, the garden I nurtured, and the warm kitchen that once smelled of cinnamon and butter cookies. It dawned on me that even the most cherished places could become unsafe when trust was broken. I promised myself I would not return there without certainty of protection. I also promised that whatever money I had left would no longer represent duty or guilt. It would represent stability, comfort, and my right to live the rest of my life peacefully. Before falling asleep, I silently acknowledged that loving someone did not require sacrificing oneself. I chose to protect my heart, my future, and what remained of my spirit, and for the first time, even with my arm immobilized and bruises forming beneath the cast, I felt stronger than I had in years. If you're holding your breath and ready to see whether healing or heartbreak wins, comment number 8, and let's step into the final chapter of this journey. Several months passed before I finally felt steady on my feet again. Time did not heal everything, but it softened the edges of the pain and allowed clarity to rise where confusion once lived. My wrist healed slowly through physical therapy sessions that demanded patience, discipline, and quiet determination. Some days, I left the sessions exhausted, other days proud, but each day I reminded myself that healing was not a race. Alongside my physical progress, I attended counseling to rebuild the emotional foundation that had cracked so violently. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to speak honestly without fear of disappointing anyone. It was uncomfortable at first, but gradually I learned that silence was not noble, and suffering quietly was not strength. My new home, in a secured retirement community, became a sanctuary rather than a reminder of what I had lost. The building was filled with calm hallways, bright windows, and staff members who treated kindness not as a duty but as a culture. I found comfort in small routines: breakfast on a sunny patio, afternoon readings in the library, slow walks around a garden shaded by palm trees. Neighbors greeted me with warm smiles, and I felt like a person again instead of a resource to be measured and taken. Meanwhile, legal matters unfolded with steady precision. My attorney handled every document, hearing, and statement with professionalism that lifted the burden from my shoulders. The court ordered my son into mandatory counseling and emotional regulation classes while issuing a strict no-contact order for my protection. It was not revenge. It was a boundary that arrived too late, but mattered deeply. His wife faced heavier consequences due to the physical nature of her actions and her direct attempt to gain control of my finances. She was sentenced to supervised community service and placed under long-term monitoring for elder abuse risk. When I heard the verdict, I did not celebrate, I simply breathed, grateful that the truth had been seen clearly. With my attorney's help, all my funds were secured through a structured trust managed by a licensed fiduciary. No one, including myself, could recklessly alter it without proper review. Knowing that my future was financially safe felt like removing a stone that had been lodged under my ribs for years. I no longer feared aging. I no longer feared being alone. Over time, something shifted inside me. I stopped asking where I went wrong as a mother, and instead reminded myself that adults make their own choices, and those choices do not rewrite my worth. I was still capable, still valuable, and still deserving of peace. I began painting again, letting colors speak when my voice did not wish to. I wrote short reflections in a journal, not to remember what happened, but to document how I survived. And slowly I allowed myself to imagine a future that was mine alone, shaped not by duty but by choice. I no longer measure my life by what I lost, but by what I finally learned to protect. When I look back, it is not the pain in my wrist or the hospital walls that echo most clearly in my memory, but the quiet realization that safety is not guaranteed simply because love once existed. Growing older does not mean surrendering control, and motherhood does not require sacrificing the last pieces of yourself to prove loyalty. My journey, although marked by betrayal and physical harm, did not end with defeat. It ended with a choice, and that choice belonged entirely to me. There was a time when I believed that love could fix everything, that patience solved every conflict, and that forgiveness would eventually soften even the hardest hearts. I now understand that love without boundaries is not love, but vulnerability left unattended. The world often romanticizes unconditional love, especially from parents, but it rarely acknowledges the danger of loving without any self-protection. It took a broken wrist, a shattered trust, and a deep emotional wound for me to finally learn that protecting myself was not selfishness. It was survival, and survival is a responsibility. I do not wake up angry, nor do I fall asleep resenting the past. Instead, I feel a quiet sense of clarity. My son made painful choices, choices I cannot rewrite, but those choices do not define my identity as a mother or as a woman. They are part of his story, not proof of my failure. I spent many nights reviewing memories, searching for signs of where everything began to unravel, but eventually I stopped. Healing did not come from solving the mystery. Healing came from accepting that I am not responsible for anyone else's morality, ambition, or desperation. My new life here is simple but meaningful. Mornings begin with sunlight through white curtains and the soft scent of ocean air drifting into my room. I enjoy a slow breakfast on the balcony, listening to distant laughter from other residents who walk the garden paths. Some carry canes, some push walkers, some hold hands like teenagers. There is a shared understanding among us that life, in its later years, should be gentle rather than demanding. I attend community art sessions where my hands, though slower and more fragile, still remember the language of paint. My canvas no longer reflects duty or nostalgia, but possibility. I have also joined a support group for older adults who experience financial or emotional exploitation by family members. At first, I felt hesitant, almost ashamed, but once I heard others speak, I felt seen, not judged. Pain does not isolate us. Silence does. In these meetings, we remind each other that wisdom does not always come from age, but from the brave act of acknowledging truth. We are not broken. We are rebuilt. If someone were to ask what I would tell another mother standing at the edge of the same story, I would say this: trust your instincts even if they feel uncomfortable. Ask questions even if others dislike hearing them. Seek professional guidance even when a family insists they know best. And never sign away your future because you fear disappointing someone. Love is not proven through sacrifice, but through respect, and respect must include yourself. I do not know whether my son will ever seek true redemption or growth. If he does, I hope he learns that integrity matters more than wealth, and that relationships cannot be built on entitlement. I remain open to forgiveness, but not to forgetting the lesson. I want peace, not permission. And I want joy, not justification. And so as I move forward, I carry my strength, my independence, my art, my clarity, and my right to live the rest of my life with dignity. The final chapters of my story will not be written by fear, manipulation, or regret. They will be written by me. In the quiet after any storm, there comes a moment when the heart learns to breathe without permission. Healing is not the absence of scars, but the decision to honor them, to accept that life does not always protect us from those we love, and love does not always shield us from harm. Strength is not loud, and wisdom is not born from comfort. They grow from the courage to acknowledge truth, set boundaries, and choose peace even when the choice feels heavy. The journey forward is not about rebuilding what was broken, but shaping something truer, rooted in dignity, clarity, and self-respect. Every ending that feels cruel can still become a door, and beyond it waits the version of oneself that refuses to be defined by loss. Thank you for watching and sharing this moment. If this story touched you, please leave a comment, follow, and subscribe for more meaningful journeys ahead.